Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Biodiversity Leaders for Harris Waltz. My name is Georgia Silvera Seamans, and I'll be this evening's MC. My colleague Marielle Anzalone is unable to join us. I'm excited to be a part of the second round of Diverse and Incredible Voices on the importance of biodiversity conservation. It's Climate Week in New York City right now. Climate change, I should say, is known as a multiplier effect. It exacerbates existing challenges, one of which is the extinction of biological diversity. Biodiversity is also one of the strategies that can be used to mitigate climate dysregulation. The main threat to biodiversity is still habitat destruction. We need our terrestrial, riverine, and marine ecosystems and the genetic and species diversity they contain to sequester carbon, to remove emissions from our air, to keep our bodies and infrastructure cool, to protect our coastal and inland communities, to feed us, and to sustain our health and well-being. Last but not least, we should protect non-human lives because they deserve to live, regardless of any benefit we derive from them. In addition to hearing from nature champions tonight, we're also raising money for the Harris Waltz campaign, and I'll drop a link in the chat where you can donate. All donations go directly to the campaign. A couple more housekeeping notes. The chat is disabled. Questions can be posed in the Q&A. If there's time at the end, speakers will answer questions. Now it is my pleasure to introduce our first speaker of the hour, Lou Harris. Lou founded Black Surfing Rockaway in Queens, New York in 2016 to make space for young people of color in the predominantly white sport of surfing. Harris's surfing and community advocacy has been covered by major news outlets. He is also a 2022 Explorers Club honoree. Welcome, Lou.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. Climate Week was pretty big for us. We teamed up with Global Citizen, Surfrider, with the Littoral Society, with the Jamaica Bay Wildlife Refuge, and we cleaned up the coastline in Brooklyn on Plum Beach, which is a very, very dirty, dirty beach. And what was nice about it was that, we teamed up with those great organizations, but also the kids in my program, ages start from 6 to about 13, 14. Most of my kids, they're about that came to the event about 6 to 10. It was nice for them to see them do that. And then also for them to do it with me, because like when I'm in the water and by the way, we picked up 500 pounds of trash, which was amazing. And then also too, doing that, our sponsor, Global Citizens, they're having this big festival, this big concert in Central Park this weekend on the Great Lawn. And a lot of big acts, Jelly Roll and Post Malone, Doja Cat. But anyway, we all got tickets, free tickets to go to that, just for participating, and the kids love that. But I was extremely happy for the kids to join me doing that, because when we're in the water and we see plastic, and we see a lot of plastic in the water. You get balloons that land in the ocean. You'll get, fishermen, boaters out there that throw their garbage in the water. And what I do is, because I'm out there pushing the kids, so I really can't get out of the water and dump the trash. So I'll take the trash, I'll put it under my wetsuit, under my wrist right there. And then when I get out, I'll go put it in the garbage. And one thing I've learned, because I've been working with kids a long time, ever since I was a camp counselor, and people, my old bosses told me when I first started being a camp counselor, they said, kids will mimic anything you do. They'll copy anything you do. So now I got 7-year-olds, 6-year-olds that, they'll paddle away from me on their surfboard. I'm like, where are you going? Oh, I see garbage. I see plastic, Mr. Lou. And I explained to them too, that we want to get that out of the water too, because you don't want to, that to possibly go inside the hole on the dolphin. You don't want that to get inside a fish's stomach. It's, it's detrimental to the eco life in the water. And it's funny too, because, I live on the beach. A lot of my students, they come from Brooklyn, Bronx, Manhattan. And when they're out with me in the water, and I see it all the time. I see dolphins, I see sharks, I see whales, and I don't trip on it. I mean, but people that aren't from there, that are from the other boroughs, they freak out. They're like, "Wow, Mr. Lou! Wow, there's fish here, there's stingrays, there's dolphins." They freak out when they see dolphins. They love it, and I'm like, "Yeah." They're like, "How come you're not bothered?" I said, "That's a good thing." I said, "Because when you see that kind of wildlife in the ocean, that means the water is clean. That means the water is super clean. That's why you don't see a lot of dolphins in the East River where Kramer was swimming in Seinfeld. That's why you don't see a lot of wildlife like that over there. It's not that clean. But out where I'm at, and not just Rockaway, but Long Beach, Jersey, Atlantic City, Lincoln, Lido Beach, Jones Beach. Those are clean bodies of water, and we have to keep it clean. I mean, that's one thing that I can't stand is a lot of these fishermen that go out there. They're out there drinking for the day, and you'll see their trash. You'll see their chip bag, their potato chip bags, their plastic bottles and stuff like that. And it just aggravates the crap out of me too, because for one, the kids get grossed out, and two, it just kills the sea life. And that's one thing that I want to protect. The ocean's my backyard. I'm a Pisces, and I love the water. So starting the kids young, you know, makes them better and makes them prepared for the future. I mean, just like me teaching them surfing, it's going to make them better and better. So I think starting the kids young and getting them into this situation, is only going to make it better for them. One of the things I tell the kids about, climate change is that, like when you leave your house, if you have something plugged in, like let's say you have your Xbox plugged in, when you leave the house, unplug it. Saves energy. When you leave the house, unplug your phone jack. When you ship a birthday gift to your grandmother, try and use as less plastic as possible. And the kids start picking it up. The kids start seeing it. And again, that's why I'm blessed to be working with kids, because I'm responsible for what they're learning. I mean, another thing I teach kids is what riptide look like, and we teach a lot of water safety. We were just on New York One News. We did a segment on water safety, and people don't know 75% of youth drownings are riptides. So it's fun when a kid comes up to you and says, "Hey, Mr. Lou, I showed my friend what a riptide was." And I'm like, wow, because they wouldn't have known that because of me. I enjoy it, and hopefully the kids pass it along.
Thank you very much, Lou. The message I took from that is we can grow conservationists with exposure. If we expose our young to the beauty of nature and give them opportunities to experience nature in a positive way, we are growing future stewards of our various types of environment. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Our next speaker is David George Haskell, who is the author of several books, among them The Song of Trees and his most recent, Sounds Wild and Broken. If you have not read his essay, 11 Ways of Smelling a Tree, you really should. Over to you, David.
Great. Thank you, Georgia. Thank you so much for inviting me to talk among this group of amazing, inspiring people. And thank you for your work on behalf of the campaign and behalf of biodiversity. As you said, I'm a writer. My training is as a biologist, and my books talk about the interconnections between people and non-human beings, trees, oceans, forests, and so on. And my latest book is this one, Sounds Wild and Broken, where I ask the question, what would it mean to listen to the world, to listen very carefully, listen to our sounds in cities, to listen underwater with hydrophones, to listen out in the forest. What can we learn from that? And to sort of boil the book down into sort of 2 points. The first thing is that we're on this incredibly diverse and beautiful planet that is worth conserving, that is worth getting to learn about more. And one way of doing that is the simple act of paying attention in the everyday, with our ears, with our noses, and with all the other senses that we have to connect to what David Abram calls the more than human world, those brothers and sister brothers of non-human species that are our kin and our neighbors. So we live in a world of marvels. But the other thing we learn is that those marvels, of course, are threatened by listening to the world. We hear in some places the world being overwhelmed with our human noise. In other places, we hear paradoxically a silencing, a loss of the diversity of natural sounds. This is true in the oceans. It's true in prairies, even in many urban areas, in forests. So by listening, we can learn both what's beautiful and also what's broken. And I wanted to talk in the context of this campaign to talk specifically about some of the things that really attract me to this particular campaign, and make me a wholehearted supporter of Harris and Walz's bid for the presidency and vice presidency. And those specific actions that I see here in Georgia. I live in Atlanta, Georgia, where right now we're celebrating quote unquote climate week by having phenomenal amounts of rain. I mean, the rain is just gushing down and has been for 24 hours. And the hurricane is just about to hit south of us and is going to come right over the city. So it's going to be an interesting 24 hours. So feeling the effect of all that extra heat in the Gulf of Mexico. So specific things from Georgia is that the Biden-Harris administration has been a strong supporter of vigorous defense of protected areas. For example, the Okefenokee Swamp, one of the biggest swamps in North America, the biggest black water swamp threatened by mining. And under their direction and their leadership, the Fish and Wildlife Service is doing its very best to encourage the state to deny mining permits that would threaten that incredible haven of biodiversity. But biodiversity is not just out in the wild areas, it's also right in town. So here in Atlanta, the administration through its leadership has provided funding for urban walking trails and biking trails that are connecting up neighborhoods that previously were either inaccessible on foot or very difficult to get to on foot. The huge environmental injustice that was enacted in Atlanta when interstates cut right through the middle of town, particularly through the Sweet Auburn neighborhood where Martin Luther King Jr. Was born and did much of his early work. There's funding now to reconnect and build connectors between neighborhoods to sort of try and redress some of that injustice from the past. There's also funding for restoration of old industrial brownfield sites within the city to turn them into historical and also biological parks where people can meet one another, they can meet their neighbors, the birds and the trees. So really on the ground, as well as all the big things like rejoining the Paris Agreement and so on, the big sort of national and international things, on the ground, I've seen again and again how Harris and also, of course, Biden, who will be no longer president next year, have been leaders and making important things happen, both out in protected areas, but also redressing and correcting some of the historical environmental injustice in cities like Atlanta. So that's why I'm donating. I encourage everyone else to donate to the campaign, and I'm delighted to be part of this call. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. I was scribbling notes as you were talking. I like your description of the current administration as being fierce protectors of protected areas and also the focus on redressing systemic racism that's embedded in the fabric of our cities. And really, on the note of biodiversity, we as people who already don't pay attention to nature should consider and are encouraged to do so with all of our senses if we have them. And I think that's a really encouraging message. There's a sort of a lot of doom and gloom, but I get from you the sense that we should be outside and enjoying nature as we can. So thank you. I am pleased to introduce our next guest, David Hayes. David describes his work as the intersection of climate, conservation, and biodiversity. He has held governmental roles related to climate and the environment, and he has also practiced environment, land, and resources law. David, welcome.
Thank you so much, Georgia. It's a pleasure to be here and talk about the record of the administration and the vice president as a key part of it in the area of biodiversity, conservation, and ecosystem integrity, practiced uniquely here and intentionally through a community and culturally facing lens. that animates so much of what this administration does. And I really enjoyed David's comments about Atlanta in that regard. So I did have a front row seat. I was in the White House the first 2 years in the Climate Policy Office. And I had some experience in that. I was a Deputy Secretary of Interior for President Clinton and for President Obama. And I will tell you that the record of achievement in biodiversity and conservation for this president and this vice president is astonishing. And it started early on day 7 with a commitment to conserve 30% of the land mass and 30% of our waters by 2030, called the America the Beautiful initiative. And we get a little overwhelmed with big numbers, but we should pay attention to the numbers because they matter. Behind this commitment is muscular funding and muscular action. In fact, there's a $1 billion America the Beautiful challenge that takes the $900 million that we have every year now for land and water conservation and challenges philanthropy to match it. And there's a notion of, because it's very complicated for communities to know, well, how do I get this kind of money for conservation and biodiversity? There's a unique program where the resource agencies are putting their money together with private money and asking the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation to be a one-stop shop so that they can get access to this funding. Nothing like this has ever been tried before. And they're looking at the broad range of conservation, biodiversity, culturally important practices like restoring rivers, coasts, wetlands, and watersheds, restoring forests, grasslands, et cetera, reconnecting wildlife corridors, improving community resilience to coastal flooding and drought and climate-related threats, and expanding access to the outdoors, particularly in underserved communities. And as a complement to this, not long ago, the administration launched something called the America the Beautiful Freshwater Challenge to protect, restore, and reconnect 8 million acres of wetlands and 100,000 miles of our nation's rivers and streams. So this is big stuff. But it's again, these are big numbers. Let me just pick up on an announcement that was just made earlier this week on Monday from the Interior Department, $24 million under this America the Beautiful program, just to give you a flavor for what's being funded. More than $4.5 million to advance coast stewardship and salmon restoration in Alaska's Yukon and Norton Sound region. More than $5 million to protect, conserve, and restore central grasslands and restore bison populations. More than $3.4 million to advance the national seed strategy to ensure that we've got our native plants lined up here. More than $3 million to restore strategic areas in the sagebrush ecosystem. More than $2.5 million to reduce the impacts from mining and address the critical intersection of ecological, social, and economic needs of Appalachia. And just yesterday, the National Park Service announced the largest federal investment in local parks ever, $254 million, 54 projects in 24 states, with a Justice 40 commitment that at least 40% of the benefits are going to go to disadvantaged communities. This is just part of a huge agenda that has been implemented with the vice president's active involvement. Let me just give you a little more ammunition to talk to your friends about. That's my role here today. At least I'm taking it as my role to give you some talking points to get people excited about biodiversity, traditional conservation, ecosystem services, et cetera. A couple more data points. The president on Earth Day 2021 had a very important executive order on forestry, talking about how we need to preserve our old growth forests and our mature forests. As part of that, he launched a national nature assessment, and he asked that the Office of Management and Budget produce some guidance that will help ensure that the valuation of ecosystem services is taken into account when federal government's making regulatory actions. Now, that sounds pretty wonky, and it kind of is, but it really matters. It means that when the Army Corps of Engineers is wondering how to protect the coast from storm surge and climate hits, that restoring wetlands instead of putting up riprap gets a look and can get funded. And then also a big report on nature-based solutions was put together under this executive order. And in fact, if you really want to do your homework on this, the White House put out a terrific compilation of its conservation and climate wins in a fact sheet that was just published on Monday. If you Google it, it's President Biden commemorates historic climate legacy during Climate Week, New York. And let me just tick off a few things. The Biden-Harris administration has established or expanded 8 national monuments and restored protections for 3 more, created 5 new national wildlife refuges and significantly expanded 5 more, established 2 new national marine sanctuaries, and began the process to designate or expand 5 more. It protected the boundary waters of Minnesota, the nation's most visited wilderness area, from a serious mining threat. Similarly, Bristol Bay and Southwest Alaska from a serious mining threat. Protected the Arctic Ocean from oil and gas development, withdrew Chaco Canyon in New Mexico and Thompson Divide in Colorado from oil and gas. Protected caribou herd in the Western Arctic. Put conservation on equal footing with development in managing our public lands. And right now is advancing the Chumash Heritage National Marine Sanctuary off the coast of California. So this is super exciting. And I really credit the campaign for putting this call on, because it can be lost. The biodiversity crisis is real. It's part of the story. It's exacerbated by climate, as you said at the outset, Georgia. And the reality is, by focusing on climate and conservation and traditional conservation, and recognizing that these systems work together, we can do great things, but not unless we elect Kamala Harris as our next president. And a final note, when I was in the White House, Kamala Harris, our vice president, was always very attuned to the connection between conservation and climate. Very concerned about climate impacts, very concerned about communities being able to be resilient in the face of climate impacts, very concerned about access to parks and the outdoors. We have a champion that we can elect to keep this amazing record going. And I hope all of you will do as I'm trying to do, talk about this in our circles and do whatever we can to get our vice president to become our next president. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. You certainly gave us a lot of behind the scenes and real world experience in administrations. And you also showcased to us that the current administration is sort of putting their money where their mouth is by making significant investments in nature and biodiversity, especially through this America the Beautiful program. So really appreciate you being on here to give this kind of information to folks who might not be familiar with it. I also am a big believer in the Harris Waltz ticket. And this is why Mariel and I are planning these calls. And it is so invigorating to hear others who share this feeling as well. So thank you. I am going to now introduce Jody Potts Joseph. Jody is Han Gwichin and lives in rural Alaska. She is a dog musher, a wilderness guide, and founder of Native Youth Outdoors. Welcome, Jody.
Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me to speak with all of you today. As our host mentioned, my name is Jody Potts Joseph. I'm Han Gwichin from Eagle Village, Alaska, which is right on the Yukon River near the Canadian border. I grew up very close to the land in a very traditional way of life of my Native peoples. And the values and the relationship I was able to develop with our natural environment, with the land around us, my traditional homelands, has really guided and informed the way that I walk my journey, decisions that I make, ideas that I bring to boardrooms, and as I advocate for biodiversity, for Indigenous rights, for environmental justice. I don't know of how many people have heard this, but Indigenous people actually protect 80% of the biodiversity, global biodiversity. And, that's a really important fact and statistic that I think needs to be more mainstream, because as we've experienced as Native people, a lot of times our voices, our ideas, solutions, leadership has not been included in a lot of policy decisions on climate, on environmental issues. But things have slowly changed over the years, and most definitely, President Biden having one of our Native sisters, Deb Haaland, as the Secretary of Interior, and her leadership there, and the work that the Biden and Harris administration has done on really important environmental issues facing our country and public lands. They've really championed a lot of really important causes and a lot of really important issues to Native communities, which ultimately, these are important issues, not just to our communities, but to the greater world, because of our relationship to the land, because of everything that our people have done to protect these sacred places, which in many cases are federal public lands, but also have untouched biodiversity that is so essential to protecting our globe. And here in Alaska, we're facing we're impacted greatly with climate change, and we're kind of ground zero for climate change. Our Arctic areas are warming 2 times the rate, could be 3 times, upwards of 3 times the rate of other places. The permafrost is thawing. We're seeing mass erosion, not only on the coastal areas, but throughout the Arctic. And it's really impacting our way of life. And as the Arctic thaws, the rest of the globe continues to, temperatures continue to rise. And it's going to be really essential for this coming administration to include Indigenous voices on really protecting what we have left. And with the track record I've seen with the Biden administration, really listening to tribal leaders. Every year he has the tribal leaders at the White House. And, he has engaged with our people and our leadership throughout his administration. And I really think he has set the tone for, really successful Harris Walz administration on climate issues, on protecting our federal public lands from natural resource extraction and development, and really sacred lands against development. And so, as our previous speaker listed, I don't want to take up more time, but I was going to list a lot of those same successes of the Biden administration. One of which, of course, is something I've worked on for many years, which is to protect the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge from oil development. And the Biden-Harris administration canceled the oil leases that were pushed through at the very last hour, pretty much, the last few days of the Trump administration. And so, our people fought really hard for the last 40 years to protect the sacred place where life begins. And we're absolutely thrilled with, the Biden administration and Secretary Deb Haaland for canceling those oil lease sales and those oil leases and continuing to protect this sacred place. So, I really am strong believer in the Harris Walls ticket. And I believe that they're going to really be our best chance as, we're all facing climate impacts around the world, and there are some important steps that we need to take. And, I have a lot of faith that Harris Walls will include Indigenous voices. We have such a close, deep, and spiritual connection with the land. And I hope and pray that we can see a change with electing Harris Walls. So I just want to thank you all so much for your time and for listening. And Harris Walls all the way. Masi.
Thank you very much, Jody. It is heartening to hear that the current administration has been an ally of Indigenous communities' stewardship of their land and sacred places. Just speaking on behalf of Mariel, we really appreciate your voice on this forum today. So thank you very much. I will next introduce David Schiffman. David wrote the book on why sharks matter. The book's main message is that sharks support healthy oceans and also coastal livelihoods. I want to say congratulations to David because he has a new article that was published today at americanscientist.org, the title of which is An All-of-Government Approach to Saving the Ocean. The new National Ocean Biodiversity Strategy exemplifies important science policy done right. Welcome, David.
Thank you, Georgia. Thank you, Georgia, for that introduction. Good evening, everyone. I am Dr. David Schiffman, and I am a Washington, D.C.-based ocean conservation scientist. I study threats to marine life and how we can solve those huge problems using wise, evidence-based policymaking and equitable processes in which everyone has a seat at the table. You can follow me on social media at Why Sharks Matter, where I will be sharing links to learn more about all of the issues that I discuss here tonight. The ocean connects and affects all Americans, but faces many serious threats, including climate change, habitat loss, pollution, and overfishing. Making the wrong policy choices can have devastating and unpredictable ripple effects that last for generations, hurting coastal communities, costing countless jobs, and driving beloved species to extinction. The Biden-Harris administration have been leaders in science-driven, evidence-based policy for the ocean and for coastal communities. They've committed the United States to the global goal of 30 by 30, fully protecting 30% of the ocean by the year 2030. And with the leadership of our amazing Secretary of the Interior, Deb Haaland, they've made huge progress towards accomplishing these goals. In contrast, Donald Trump is the only US president in history to actually remove protections from a marine protected area, the Northeast Canyons and Seamounts Marine National Monument. The Biden-Harris administration have also taken many other important steps in protecting wildlife and wild places and sustainably managing natural resources for the future, resulting in the first ever national nature assessment that David Hayes mentioned, the first ever national ocean biodiversity strategy, which you can read all about in my article today in American Scientist magazine, the first ever ocean acidification action plan, and many more documents that will be held up as exemplars of science-based environmental policymaking for years to come. They've created several new national marine sanctuaries and started the process of creating more, including starting the process of protecting nearly 700,000 square miles of ocean in an area 4 times the size of California as part of the Pacific Remote Islands National Marine Monument. They've also invested billions in decarbonizing the transportation sector through the Clean Ports Program. The Harris Walls administration would continue and expand upon these amazing and important strides. In contrast, Project 2025, a blueprint for a second Trump administration, would be a disaster for the ocean, for marine life, and for coastal communities. Among other things, it calls for the total elimination of NOAA, the U.S. government agency that houses the National Weather Service, the National Marine Fisheries Service, who make sure that U.S. fisheries are sustainably managed, and many endangered species biologists who work to protect whales, coral reefs, sea turtles, and more. I have friends and family in Florida, and I'm very worried about this current hurricane. Imagine if US citizens had to rely on a paid subscription to a private company to get severe weather alerts, as Project 2025 calls for. Even the CEO of AccuWeather says that's a terrible idea. Project 2025 would also cripple the EPA, making it easier for wealthy corporations to pollute our drinking water, the food we eat, and the air we breathe, while causing incalculable harm to the marine environment. They'd also destroy progress made on protecting wildlife and wild places by pulling us out of 30 by 30, and would even eliminate the Antiquities Act, a powerful legal tool that allows US presidents to protect special places. The choice here, if you care about the ocean, could not be more clear. If we want to protect the ocean, protect coastal communities that depend on a healthy ocean, and protect beloved marine life, we must make sure that Donald Trump is not elected to a second term and that Kamala Harris is elected. We are not going back. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. That was a very rousing set of remarks, both about the ocean and about the urgency of making a choice for Harris and Waltz. I was really buoyed to hear about the marine sanctuary, the 700,000 square miles of ocean, 4 times the size of California, that will be protected. That is an incredible amount of volume and will certainly be a boon for ocean biodiversity. I really appreciate your remarks. To Heather White, who is actually here in New York City, though we're not in the same space. Many of us, well, I'll speak for myself, experience eco-anxiety. How do we cope with this emotion? And how can we harness it to protect nature? Thankfully, Heather White's new book, Eco-Anxiety, Saving Our Sanity, Our Kids, and Our Future, offers answers to these questions. And I'm happy to turn it over to you, Heather.
Thank you so much, Georgia, and thank you, Marielle. I'm in an airport, so I hope that you can hear me. I am on my way back from Climate Week, where I started my morning at 30 Rock, launching my book, Eco-Anxiety, as Georgia mentioned, and that really is the mental health impacts of the climate crisis. You heard from the Davids, you heard from Lou, you heard from Jody about the incredible record of Kamala Harris on biodiversity. You also know that Harris and Walz, they're the right choice to make if you care about nature, if you care about the future of our planet. But one of the things I want you all to do is, after you listen to the speakers today and you reflect on your own case, your own reasoning of why we're going to make history by electing Kamala Harris, is I want you to think about future generations. Future generations, that's a term that we use a lot in the environmental community, right? But sometimes we kind of act as if these people are strangers, and they're not. Future generations are young people that we know and that we love, and they are very, very worried about the future that we're leaving them. There was a survey in September 2021, a global survey of 10,000 young people ages 16 to 25, 47%, nearly half, so that climate anxiety interfered with their daily life. Nearly 70% said they were extremely worried about the climate crisis. And 1 in 4 do not want to have children of their own. 1 in 4, because of the climate crisis. Not a lifestyle choice, but because they're so uncertain about the future that we are leaving them. And that is a call to action for all of us. All of us on this call, all of us who'll be watching this on YouTube or watching this on social media, we already care about the environment. We already know about the incredible record that Kamala Harris has had, whether it is as a senator in California, her role as a prosecutor, or the tremendous record with the Biden administration and the absolutely historic investments in nature and biodiversity that we've heard, whether it be the America the Beautiful campaign, whether it be the 30 by 30 program, whether it be the incredible Inflation Reduction Act and historic investments in climate solutions. But here's the thing. We need to move in close. This is going to be one of the tightest elections of our lifetime. I am a former recount attorney for Al Gore in 2000. 537 votes made all the difference. 537 votes. Every single person's vote matters. Early voting is starting very, very soon. Please move in close. Talk to your family, talk to your friends, talk to them about the work you do, talk to them about this incredible record, but also ask them really to consider, how young people feel about the future that we're leaving them. I think that's one of the biggest takeaways when I give talks across the country and actually globally about the mental health impacts of the climate crisis. I say to older generations, make space for the young people you love. Ask them how they feel about the future and really listen and make sure they know that they are not alone in climate action. And we know that nature and preserving biodiversity is a very powerful solution to climate. And not only that, time in nature is very important for our overall well-being and mental health. Increasing access for public spaces, increasing pocket parks, increasing natural parks, increasing opportunities for us to spend time in nature, especially young people, is essential to the future. So with that said, I just want to again encourage you to move in close, talk to your neighbors and friends. We can make history, and we're at a pivotal moment. Just like I felt like in 2000, being a recount attorney with Al Gore was a sliding doors moment for where we were on climate. And looking back, those almost 25 years ago, that was a really important moment. And let's make sure that we know that we haven't left anyone behind. We're not going back, and we're encouraging everyone we know to get involved in this movement, which is the biggest crisis of our lifetimes. And everyone is welcome and everyone is needed. And let's create that space for everybody to get involved. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Heather. I'm definitely ready to go. 537 people, the difference between administrations. I had forgotten that. I'm deeply moved by the way you spoke about young people and future generations, and that we should be voting for them because we know them and we love them. They're part of our lives. So thank you so much for being here with us tonight, and all the best with your new book. Our next speaker is Adrienne Tosas. Dr. Tosas and I were in a virtual book club for 2 years. She's a Puerto Rican ecologist with a focus on Caribbean bird species conservation. One of her papers is on the Puerto Rican vireo, one of the archipelago's endemic birds. Welcome, Adrienne.
Thanks so much, Georgia. It's an honor to join such a distinguished group of American leaders who share a passion for safeguarding our planet's biodiversity. I will be presenting my perspective as an ecologist specializing in bird conservation from the island of Puerto Rico, a Commonwealth of the United States where I am from. Puerto Rico is located in the Caribbean region and supports a range of unique ecosystems from lush tropical rainforest to El Yunque to vibrant coral reefs and coastal mangroves. Its geographic isolation has led to high levels of endemism, with many species only found on the island. In fact, the Caribbean is among the top 5 hotspots in the world for the high number of unique animal and plant species. The region is home to over 700 bird species, out of which 180 are unique to these islands. In addition to sustaining biodiversity, healthy ecosystems regulate our climate, protect us from natural disasters, and provide us with the air we breathe, the water we drink, and the food we consume, among many other essential ecological services. However, today we're living a triple planetary crisis due to 3 interrelated problems: climate change, pollution, and biodiversity loss. We are seeing an unprecedented decline in species abundance, with around 1 million species now threatened with extinction, more than ever before in human history. The planet has entered the 6th mass extinction directly due to unsustainable human activities, mainly habitat destruction and degradation and overexploitation of resources, that according to prediction could result in the loss of more than 1/10 of the planet's plant and animal species before the end of this century. It has already been reported that 3 billion birds have been lost in North America alone, 1 in 4 birds gone since 1970. And according to BirdLife International, 49% of bird species of the world are declining. Biodiversity in Puerto Rico faces the same threats as the rest of the world. However, these challenges are intensified by the effects of climate change on islands, such as rising sea levels, increased frequency and severity of storms and droughts, putting its delicate ecosystems at greater risk. This was evident during the passage of Hurricane Maria in 2017, when the most powerful storm to strike the island since 1928. The hurricane destroyed or severely damaged an estimated 30 million trees, while also devastating the livelihoods of the people all across Puerto Rico. We already know that to combat global warming, our leaders first need to recognize the current environmental challenges and prioritize on policies to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, to limit deforestation, and invest in climate adaptation to protect ecosystems and create resilient communities. Moreover, participation in international conventions and collaborations is crucial to address these major challenges, as these transcend national borders and require coordinated efforts for effective solutions. In time of elections, we all have the opportunity to rise to the occasion by participating and engaging in collective efforts to shape a better future. I particularly encourage minority groups, especially the Latino and Puerto Rican communities, to actively engage in the democratic process. By supporting the Harris Walz campaign, we can join forces to elect effective leaders who understand our needs and are committed to advocating for environmental justice by bringing together equitable, diverse decision-making teams and promoting sustainable economic progress. Thank you for the opportunity to be here with you tonight.
Thank you so much, Adrienne. Your observation at the end about the importance of diverse decision-making is really crucial. We've had speakers tonight mention that. I'm very glad that you brought that up again. You know, I was listening to a podcast earlier today, and the guests on that podcast were talking about the extreme effects of climate change and biodiversity loss on islands. You're a resident of an island. The costs of inaction are really clear for some of the world's populations. And one of the things that we can do in this election is to vote for our neighbors, especially those who are most vulnerable to the impacts of biodiversity destruction and climate dysregulation. So I really appreciate your work and thank you for being with us this evening.
Sure, thank you. Thanks to you. Bye.
Bye. Our next speaker is Alex Troutman, a wildlife biologist and science communicator. Alex is the author of several wildlife guides for children and was a Safina Center Junior Fellow. Alex is one of the leading advocates for diverse representation in STEM fields. Alex, welcome.
Hey, y'all. Thank you for having me. Like Georgia said, my name is Alex Troutman. I'm a wildlife biologist and science communicator. And I just have to say, wow, to be up here with so many great biodiversity leaders, I can't even just echo what they all have said so far. And for me, I'm going to be talking about biodiversity as well as the hunting perspective and interactions with villages and as a Black man. So biodiversity it's essential to our everyday life, from providing food, shelter, and medicine. All of the diverse organisms that make up the natural world is, like I said, it's essential to everything that we do as humans. We get food from it. We get our medicine, as well as providing some of the shelter some of the materials that we use to build our shelters. Without the biodiversity that we have, many of the foods that we eat will be lost if we lose some of the pollinators, especially some of the specialized ones like bumblebees for tomatoes, or long-nosed bats for the agave plant that makes tequila. But also looking at the perspective of biodiversity for our wetlands and mangroves protection that we receive from them. Like, I'm also down here in Georgia, and we are going through tropical storms right now. We're having, again, like David said, there's flooding. It's been raining for over 24 hours right now. And what helps to combat some of the flooding is having wetlands and having those diverse plants that are in the wetlands to help soak up some of the water, but also that helps to provide filtration of that water, getting some of the nutrients and other materials that are coming off the roads and going through the wetlands and filter out to help make that clean water. But also with wetlands and mangroves, the plant biodiversity species and some of the animals in there help to support other animals and their biodiversity by utilizing those as breeding grounds and nursing grounds and pupping grounds. And without those and losing those biodiverse areas with the wetlands and mangroves, we will lose the huge diverse of marine and bird species that we have that are utilized in those areas. And also, we're right now with this hurricane expecting 20-foot storm surge as well. Wetlands and mangroves with their plants help to protect us from those storm surges and the energy and force that comes along with that. So if we're losing that, we're losing those protections for our coastal communities. So we need to definitely vote for individuals like Kamala Harris and Walls that are going to help us to not only protect the biodiversity, but protect ourselves when these summer events happen, and they're not going to decrease regulations for the EPA from NOAA that will be detrimental to the American way of life, especially those frontline communities that already are seeing some of the effects of a changing climate. Now, let's switch gears and talk about why hunting matters to biodiversity and why I, as a Black man and biologist, support hunting. Well, first off, as a Black man, the idea of like hunting and fishing, like it's always been in me. And but for many others, like being a Black individuals and being outside just in general can be a touchy subject from the lack of access, harassment, and unfortunately, even death that some people individuals have experienced due to the unfortunate treatment in the outdoor field, as well as the lack of representation and outdoor media is portraying it as something only white individuals do. But for ages, we as Black individuals have been connected to not only the outdoors, but also to hunting. For instance, many individuals during the slave period were utilizing that to help add extra assistance from what they weren't getting from their owner. But then in times when we were freed, that utilized them to actually make money for hunting and gathering, to sell what they had caught fishing or hunted to make extra money. But how does this correspond today? So hunting can directly affect biodiversity by helping to maintain animals at a good level and healthy level and protect the local ecosystem from like overbrowsing from deer, where deer would decimate not only some crops, but also vegetation in our forests and national parks, as well as protecting us individually from these deer with deer strikes. Here in Georgia, there's around 45,000 deer strikes a year with cars, and then our deer population is well over 1 million deer here in Georgia alone. But with hunting, we can help to reduce that population as well as help to control the biodiversity by helping them manage these species and not over browsing and taking out natural vegetation and allowing those vegetation to grow, as well as not limiting the vegetation that is not that has not been ate by deers and other species. How does hunting help wildlife conservation and help to ensure biodiversity in other areas? Well, with a lot of the money from hunting via taxes or adult stamp, a lot of those percentage goes back into conservation, either by buying lands and protecting them, but also helping to pay the individuals to help manage the lands, and also increasing the number of individuals that are getting exposed to hunting and fishing and the outdoors in general. You can't understand and protect what you don't know. So by encouraging and exposing these individuals to hunting and fishing, we can help to be better stewards of the land, as well as learn more about the diversity of what we're seeing, especially being able to get hands and eyes on what's in your local waters, what was here 10 years ago, what's now not here. And also just been out hiking and walking in general, you can see what plant species are now no longer in your area, or they were at one time at this lower elevation level, but now that it's warming up, they also are moving up in elevation. So it's kind of with hunting, fishing, and just being outdoor in general, you can use this to be indicators for the change in the biodiversity that we are experiencing as the climate is changing. And with that, we have to be sure that we're voting for a president that's going to be effective at managing and maintaining and helping to protect these lands, our waters, and that's not going to roll out deregulations to many of the conservation agencies or open up some of our important wildlife areas to drilling and mining. So ensuring that we vote for Harrison Wall's campaign to ensure that we not only have this protection for us here, but also our future generations to come, because we are borrowing the land from them.
Thank you very much, Alex. You brought up a really critical example about the importance of hunting, especially as it relates to deer, because of the impacts that deer have on forest regeneration, and hunting can be a way to mitigate some of that impact. I hadn't thought about hunting as a way to get to know nature, so I'm very appreciative of you bringing that up in this conversation. Thank you for being here this evening. I would like to introduce Jake Schwartz from the Harris Walls campaign, who is here to give us an update. Over to you, Jake.
Hi, all. Thank you so much for having me tonight. I'm going to give the most boring talk of the night. I'm not going to touch on biodiversity much at all, unfortunately, but on politics and the stakes of this election. Because at the end of the day, that is why we're here this evening, is to understand the stakes of the issues that we're talking about and what we can do to actually influence this election and save nature and the oceans and the biodiversity that we all love and cherish. And that's why we're here. But we have to not just vote, but volunteer to make that happen. So I'm going to give a brief debrief of where we are as a climate voters team here on the Harris campaign, and then a couple of quick call to action that we can all jump in and help throughout the next 40 days. Only 40 days left until the election. So September was our unofficial Climate Voters Month of action, with fundraisers, canvas launches, national organizing calls, a lot of surrogate events, creator activity or influencer activity in almost all the battleground states, and a direct-to-camera video from the vice president, which that one came out yesterday morning, officially launching Climate Voters for Harris. So going over each of those pieces. So fundraising is obviously one of the most important ways that the climate voters and larger conservation movement can help out the campaign. And I know this group has fundraised some before, and a lot of our pop-up groups have as well. This week alone, obviously, is Climate Week in New York, and we had a couple of really big fundraisers, including one with Governor Walz on Monday evening, where the governor spoke in really personal terms about the importance of the planet to him himself, and as someone who grew up in communities where, you know, he grew up in a 500-person town in Nebraska where you had to care for the earth, otherwise you wouldn't eat at night. And you can really tell how strongly he as a person cares about these issues. So we have also had a series of campus launches, as I mentioned, and are looking to have more throughout October. So if you do live close to a battleground state, definitely keep your eye out for those. We had ones with Bill Nye, the Science Guy, and Jane Fonda last week in North Carolina and Michigan, where we also had those influencers there to amplify their remarks and blast that message out to a much wider audience than could attend in person. We also had launches in Georgia with Congresswoman Stansberry, who's a lifelong environmental advocate, and in Phoenix with Congressman Ed Case. And so those will continue in different formats throughout October as well, to try to draw new climate volunteers, conservation volunteers, planet-focused volunteers into the fold. You know, maybe some of you on this call haven't volunteered before yourself, or maybe you only volunteer the day of or the day before the election, when it's a month before. It's right now that we need you all the most. And then yesterday, as I said, that was when the video dropped and she officially launched this climate voters movement. She had several social media posts this week touching on the importance of clean air and clean water for Americans, and specifically American youth. She had a couple really powerful tweets about how the young vote in this country is fighting for the literal survival of the planet. And so if you haven't seen those, I recommend going to her social media and checking those out. So looking forward, a couple of big things that we are focused on in October that we would love your help on as lovers of this planet and people who understand the stakes. So our biggest new program that we're unveiling in the next 40 days is our relational organizing program. Relational organizing just refers to using your own networks of people and using issues that you know that they care about and that you care about. So in this case, biodiversity, to get them to vote. And so this could be people you know in battleground states that maybe are younger and aren't sure if they're going to vote this year, or maybe they're definitely voting, but they're not going to volunteer, or maybe they're not voting. I know many of you, I know I have Republicans in my life who are voting for the other guy, who might be convinced by a really strong conservation pitch. And so we'll have some opportunities in the next couple of weeks to explore what that looks like, to talk to people in our lives about the issues that we all care about and try to convince them. So the first of those opportunities is this Monday. It'll be the first of these calls. It's our kickoff call. We're calling it Climate Action for America. And we'll be going over how to use this app called Reach, which is the best tool to reach out to our own networks and convince them to vote for the vice president using specific messaging, videos, graphics that we have prepared. We'll hear from Senator Ed Markey and go over, again, the right messaging and language to use that is most likely to be persuasive. So that's this Monday, and I'll put a link in the Zoom chat for that. But then the next week, we believe October 6th is the day we're aiming for. There'll be another one of those calls with conservation as the focus. And so on that call, we'll be talking about conservation messaging and how we can use that as the hook to get other people in our lives to vote for the vice president. And so more information will be sent out about that as well. And beyond that, I think the best way to get involved and to stay up to date with all that the Climate Voters team is doing here at Harris for President is to sign up on our official link if you haven't already. So go to kamalaharris.com/climatevoters to sign up, and then you'll hear from our weekly listservs and our regular updates with events. And we'll send you links to all these calls and all that. So I'll put that link in the chat as well. But that is the clearest thing you can do tonight to get involved and help win this election. There are 40 days left. Stakes could not be higher, as everyone on this call understands. So thank you for joining this evening. Thank you for getting involved. More info to come in the following weeks. There is so much work to do to save the literal planet upon which we all stand. Thanks for having me, guys.
Thank you very much, Jake. I'm glad to know that in addition to climate, there's focus on clean air and clean water. And I hope a more robust conversation about biodiversity and nature conservation to come. I want to give a big round of applause to this evening's speakers. I'm going to do a silent round of applause. Thank you for your expertise and your individual calls to action. Thank you to all of those who attended this forum. We will be back for a final Biodiversity Leaders Zoom in October, so look out for that date. We'll send it from the usforbiodiversity@gmail.com email. Thank you again. Have a great evening and hope to meet those of you whom I haven't met in person. Hope to meet you in person soon. Thank you so much. Good night.